It was the small farmers rum. Like they would have portable stills and they would they didn't have the means to make rum from molasses. They decided to just take the raw product and distill on these portable pot stills. So like it was kind of known around Martinique with the small farmers that the agricultural rum from the farmers was made from sugarcane juice, and then the industrial rum was made from molasses.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode. What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Decoding Cocktails. I'm Chris LeBeau. Before we get started today, I just want to say that today's episode is brought to you by people like Jim. Jim is one of many of my patrons that is enjoying various monthly benefits. I created this patron program because I've run into things over and over again where people have said, hey, I really want to continue working with you, and trying to find ways that are affordable and accessible rather than always being private classes, be that virtual or in person. The idea that you could pay in for a small monthly rate for things like gated content, tours of the liquor store, and coming up in the not too distant future, a class on fall and Halloween related cocktails. So if you are interested, patreon.com/decodingcocktails, and shoot me a note if you have any questions. My guest today is Kiowa Bryan. She is the National Brand Manager and Marketing Director for Spiribam. Spiribam is a company that has a number of brands in it, and it includes great products like Chairman's Reserve and Joseph Cartron. Assuming I'm saying that right, I have a French last name, but I do not speak French. But the reason why I tracked Kiowa down is I was particularly interested to talk about Rhum Agricole. And so Spiribam also holds Rhum Clément and Rhum GM. Us gringos, again, might know it as Rhum JM, but if you were saying in the proper French, it would be GM. And so Kiowa's story is actually pretty fun in that she was working at a bar and restaurant called the Eveleigh in West Hollywood. A link to it will be in there because it is absolutely beautiful. She said they had a ton of rum on the bar, but what was really interesting is that when her now boss, Ben Jones, was giving her an orientation on Rhum Agricole from the island of Martinique, she was really captivated by it. And so she went home, did all of her own research on Martinique, the history of agricole, and eventually emailed Ben and said, hey, when are you next going to be in Martinique? Because I have to come down and get a tour and really dive in deep. So from there, it really became very all-consuming for her. And as I think I heard her say separately, she wrote up a job description and for the next year, 18 months, would every once in a while send it to Ben until he ended up hiring her into her current role with the company. So props to Kiowa for having the hustle to do that. She is also a board member for Another Round, Another Rally. And this is an important thing to talk about too, because COVID really helped exacerbate, but also create conversational change around things like work-life balance, proper pay and benefits, the things that make hospitality a more sustainable landing ground for people, as opposed to something that is like, oh, this is what I'm going to do until I get my life together. And so they are helping raise the conversation about important issues like tipping. Tipping is something that while it might feel good to leave a big tip, that it leaves kind of an unbalanced playing field. And so Kiowa has sent me a couple of links, and so we're going to kind of dig into that a little bit too. Her Instagram, quickly before I forget, is absolutely stunning, so I highly recommend that. Keep up with her for all things agricole, but also just, she talked a little bit about kind of just enjoying curating that. And so she is at Rhum, R-H-U-M, Muffin, Rhum Muffin. A couple of things that I found useful to think about. So Rhum Agricole, it has what's called an AOC. That is a French term that I dare not try to pronounce, but essentially it is like champagne. It can only be technically made on the island of Martinique. And one thing I found interesting is that its protocols are so tightly regulated that she said, if it says Rhum Agricole and it is from the island of Martinique, it's going to be great because you can't have that label and it not be awesome. That said, at present, there are roughly only 7 or so certified AOC distilleries. That said, one of the things we talked about a little bit that I need to do some more research on, maybe we could talk more about in a further conversation, is she said there are a handful of distilleries right now on the island that actually are not certified. And I don't know how much of this is them not having gotten around to it yet, but it also makes me think of a broader conversation happening in the agave field, which is there are a number of products now coming to the market which essentially call themselves agave distillate. And when we're talking broadly about rum as a category, if you will, it's sugarcane distillate because cachaça is sugarcane distillate. It's not technically rum, even though it's very, very close. But so are these craft distilleries, for lack of a better term, gaming to kind of actually not call themselves agricole because they want to get a little bit more playful, and people could feel various ways about that, but that would be really interesting to know. Something that we did not get to in the interview that I won't take up too much time on now, but there will be a link to it, is sugar cane versus sugar beets. So many, many years ago, I believe if my history is correct, it was Napoleon Bonaparte said, hey, the French Empire is not going to use sugar cane anymore for sugar production. We're going to use sugar beets. And so that created a real issue for Martinique in particular because they, and this was true in a lot of colonial America or the colonial New World, but Martinique could primarily really only sell their stuff to other French colonies or the French mainland. And so when suddenly France didn't want its primary export anymore, what are you going to do? And so that is part of what pushed things to be where Martinique now makes the rum primarily the way it does. About what I'll have a link into what sugar cane versus sugar beets are in there. It is also, of course, important when talking about colonies to recognize that for a long period of time, people in Martinique might not have been paid or paid well. There are still occasionally, in more recent history, have been protests against treatment and wages. And so it's just an important thing that when we are talking oftentimes about sugarcane distillate, to remember that there is a very hard and ugly history to a lot of this stuff. So the final thing I wanted to talk about, because you hear about this in agave, but with sugarcane distillate, so Rhum Agricole, because they are juicing fresh sugarcane and putting it right into fermentation and distillation, where and how it is grown makes a huge difference. And so things we might not think about. There are countless varietals of sugarcane out there. And Kiowa was quick to say that while the plant itself has an impact, where and how it's grown also makes a big difference. As you move across the relatively small island of Martinique, the climate changes, the soil changes. There are volcanic areas. You have more areas heavily influenced by Atlantic breezes versus tropical natures on the Caribbean side. And so that is part of what really influences the variety and flavor you might experience. Okay, that is what I've got for this episode. Enjoy my conversation with Kiowa. Give her a follow, and definitely, if you don't know Agricole, get out there and have some. It is awesome. Kiowa, thanks so much for taking some time to talk today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm a little rusty on podcasts. It's been a while, so I'm excited to chat.
Well, the good news is we go easy on our guests for about the first 5 minutes. So good news.
Oh, great.
where I usually like to start is there a moment, a time, a memory you remember kind of falling in love with or deciding you wanted to really commit to this industry here?
I mean, I kind of my first job ever was at a ski resort, being a bus person at the age of 16. So I kind of fell into the hospitality industry at a pretty young age. And then I would say my next job was working at Starbucks as a barista. So that kind of set me up for the bartending community. I think after making, half calf venti skim extra hot all foam lattes or whatever at 7 in the morning for a line of people out the door, really teaches you how to multitask. And it really gave me an appreciation for bartending when I started, working behind the bar, and I already kind of had that multitasking skill. um, so I definitely was like set up to appreciate the beverage industry from working in hospitality for now over, I've worked in the hospitality slash food and beverage space now for over 20 years. So it was always kind of in my blood, I guess. And so there wasn't necessarily a defined moment, but from a very young age, I appreciated everything that is food and beverage.
So if somebody was thinking about, bartending as a career at some point, obviously getting experience behind the bar and in the restaurant itself would be valuable. But do you think if they're like, well, what should I do first? Is getting a job at a shop like a Starbucks or their local coffee shop a great place in terms of being able to manage, six custom orders at one time? Is that, does that ring true for you?
100%. Yeah, I think the skill of managing the stress of multitasking, that you would need to work behind a coffee bar, as well as you're not always working behind the coffee bar. Oftentimes you're working the register and you're dealing with customers, and that customer service aspect as well is so important. Those are two like really important things, skills, that you can apply to bartending. Whereas, I mean, no offense to all the bartending schools there are, but they're never going to give you the skills that you need to be a successful bartender, which the most important thing to be a successful bartender is to be a human. So, yeah, I think a coffee shop is a great place to start, or just be a bar back, in a bar is also a great place to start if you're interested.
That makes me think of my business education and getting into the business world and realizing, well, business isn't quite like what I learned in school. So,
Yeah, but you probably know a lot of equations and statistics. So,
right.
maybe one day. I took a lot of theater classes, and growing up, and now I get to apply them when I do presentations or education. So it all it's all relative. It all works out, I guess.
So, speaking of theater, and I don't know if this would be related to your background at all in that, but one thing I couldn't help notice as I was getting prepared for our interview was uh, the palette of your Instagram is very compelling and seems to kind of have this like consistent theme that slowly flows in and out. Is this a long time passion or interest? Like it's beautiful. So tell me a little bit about that.
Thank you. Yes, I don't know how that started. I guess being an artist in some capacity, like I did a lot of theater growing up, a lot of, like regional musical theater. And then initially I moved from, I grew up in Vermont, did regional theater there, and then moved to New York to try and, get on Broadway. And that didn't necessarily work out, but I fell in love with the restaurant business. So, and the bar and bartending. So that part worked out. Um, but I also like did a lot of theater, and I played piano growing. I mean, sorry, I did a lot of musical things. Like I played the piano and sang, and so I guess maybe there's a tie-in there, but I definitely think in a little bit of I love colors, and I I'm not necessarily like an art aficionado by any capacity, but especially over the last few years, I've taken, especially over the pandemic, in my role, I've taken on a more marketing role with photography and social media focus. And so I just think it's very important. I mean, I know now, in social media, everything is changing constantly. And like, it's not about having a pretty homepage on your Instagram, and it's all about being real, and like, not having, it's all about reels and videos and whatnot. But to me, like, that landing page is kind of like a summary, a quick snapshot of you. And I like to have the organized colors and have a theme and have a direction. And I guess maybe I'm a little uh too organized in that way. But yeah, I maybe it's a snapshot of me. I like to plan things out, and I like things to look organized. But yeah, it's definitely, I definitely don't have as much time to curate it as much as I want to. But when I do post something, I make sure that it's deliberate and intentional and it fits.
Sometimes you just got to say to hell with that algorithm and do whatever makes you feel good. So
A
that's
100%. That's how I feel. Maybe not for our brands. It's like, social media. I try and play with the algorithms and play nice with them, if you will, and stay
sure.
up to date with them. But for my own, it's just for me, and it's like, I guess that is how I am. Fuck the algorithm. This is me. Sorry. Can I say the F word on here?
You can say the F word on here. That's just fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
This is a podcast by adults for adults, etc. Uh, so I, I'm excited to be able to talk about rum because it is certainly my great love too. But if I remember correctly, so you were in Los Angeles working at what I saw, and we'll have a link to this at a place called the Eveleigh. And it was striking. But if I remember correctly, Kiowa, you had uh, a whole bunch more rums like they were either there or you put them there, then were warranted. And so was that kind of your introduction, or was that the moment you got pulled into rum at that point in time?
No, I guess yes and no. I actually didn't realize until years later that my boss, Ben Jones, who is the great grandnephew of Omer Clement, and so Rum Clement is his family's name, and it's his family lineage. I didn't realize until a few years later that I had met him when he'd done a brief presentation at my first like legitimate um, craft cocktail school type thing. It was when I opened Soho House in West Hollywood, and he had come and done a presentation on Rhum Agricole. I just remembered like a really tall man with French rum, and I didn't really know what Rhum Agricole meant. Sorry, Ben, but I guess it didn't quite resonate with me, because even after that training, I was like, I was a little confused about what it was. And I think that's obviously because this was like it was like a training camp for to break all the bad habits that all of us bartenders had from working in nightclubs and dive bars and whatnot, which great skills to have, but then to go to a very regimented, like template driven milk and honey style cocktail program. So it's just like a lot of information coming at us, learning about a lot of spirits, a lot of flashcards, a lot of like um, trial, extra speed trials, and all that type of stuff. So it kind of went over my head that that's what we had learned about on that day until I met him a couple years later. Um, and it was a training that he did at Scopa in Los Angeles about Rhum Agricole that really kind of turned me on to how unique it was. Simultaneously, and maybe just before that, my boss at the Eveleigh, Dave Kupczynski, who now runs a wonderful bar called Maruno in Silver Lake that I highly suggest everybody go to. He had made me a shift drink after work that was what he called a tea punch, and I never heard of it before. I mean, this is probably, geez, now like Time, where does it go? I guess this was like 11 years ago or something, 12 years ago. And I was just like blown away. I was like, how is this just three ingredients? And I mean, granted, he made it as I still see a lot of bartenders do, like on a snow cone with pebble ice, which is more like you know, more like a really strong daiquiri snow cone with Rhum Agricole. But just like the simple flavors of the Agricole, it was like so different. I was familiar with cachaça, but it was like so different than cachaça. Um, so different than a caipirinha, but like there was still that like raw essence of sugarcane that you just didn't get with molasses rum. And those two things, like the experience of meeting Ben at that Scopa training and Dave giving me the tea punch, just really, I'm one of those people that when I get my mind set on something, I like go down the wormhole. And I just like, I went home, I got on my computer, I learned all I could about Martinique, and then I booked a ticket to Martinique. I mean, I got in contact with Ben and was like, when are you going to be in Martinique? Like, I'm going to book a ticket. Tell me when to come. Like, will you just show me around? And yeah, I mean, that was when there were very few flights to Martinique. It was like a 24-hour experience that cost like $1,600 round trip. And I was just like, I don't care. I'm doing it. I'm going. I have to see it. I'm obsessed now. And yeah, I guess the rest is history. So it was specifically Rhum Agricole and that coincidence of events that really changed everything for me.
I still remember the first time I tasted and smelled agricole, and it was just like, it's just like it. There are those moments like my first sip and taste of Amaro, where I'm like, I've not done this before. What is this? So we are growing, and I want to talk about sugarcane versus sugar beets a little bit too. But so we're growing a sugarcane plant, and then we have crushed it. We have some juice from that stalky sugarcane. In most cases, we go on to make sugar, and one of the byproducts of sugar is molasses. So most rums that people have tasted uh, are going to be molasses based rums. Now, if you're in Martinique, Haiti, Brazil, you are taking that sugarcane juice and fermenting and distilling it. So you're getting a much more grassy, like lively flavor. First thing to make sure. So, is that accurate for the audience right there?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is kind of an eau de vie of sugarcane, if you will,
Okay.
rather than a molasses distillate.
Sure. And so a lot of people may still more of like be familiar with a caipirinha compared to a tea punch or cachaça compared to agricole, at least with the analogy. How would you describe, and I know that both are multifaceted, but is there a high level way to think about the difference between a cachaça and a rum agricole?
I mean, well, both have, interestingly enough, a lot of people think that rum has no rules. Both have a pretty strict set of rules. Um, but I would say that generally, the cachaça that you taste in Brazil. Well, first of all, let me just say that you never tell a Martinican that like cachaça is similar to agricole, and never tell a Brazilian that Rhum Agricole is similar. Yes, they are very similar in retrospect, but I would say that like the biggest difference would be, to me, the rules around Martinique Rhum Agricole are that it has to be distilled in a particular column still, to a certain degree level, whereas cachaça can be distilled in a pot still as well. So Rhum Agricole from Martinique definitely is a little bit more refined because of that column still. So generally, overall, everything that is AOC Rhum Agricole from Martinique is very consistent, and that it was distilled to the same degrees, between 65 and 75 degrees on the same still. Obviously, there's still differences depending on the terroir and the sugarcane and all that stuff. But in Brazil, there's a lot more room for interpretation, even though they have the rules. You can distill, being able to use two different types of stills really makes the differences vast. So you can distill cachaça on a pot still, you can distill it on a column still, and as you probably know, some of the column stills that it's distilled on are very large column stills that remove flavor, and then some of the pot stills are smaller and don't remove a lot of flavor. So you can imagine the level of congeners, the difference between the congeners. It's just like a wider base, even with the rules that they have. Whereas Rhum Agricole for Martinique is very consistent because honestly, that still really makes it more consistent in being that refined product.
Yeah, because at this point there are only seven distilleries on Martinique. Is that correct? Or it could have changed, but is it seven?
Well, and that's an interesting thing as well because there are now some that is accurate for AOC distilleries, but there's a lot of distilleries popping up that are not a lot. I would say probably three, or I know there of two or three that are working, but I know there's some others that are popping up as well. But they're bringing in pot stills and they're just not adhering to the AOC laws, or not yet. So I unfortunately have not spent a lot of time in Martinique since the pandemic started. So I'm a little rusty on what's happened in the last 3 years. But yeah, the last that I heard, there's definitely at least three non-AOC distilleries that are in, at least in the works or are producing rum currently in Martinique and outside Martinique.
Yeah, so first, I guess we're getting into a little bit of the whole what you're running into in agave here. One, you have the craft industry popping up, but also like this destilados de agave, aguardiente, like, hey, we're gonna distill stuff and we don't necessarily have to have the label. We're just gonna make delicious sugarcane distillate, regardless of whether we can call it agricole or not.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to get me started on that because I'm gonna piss off a bunch of American sugarcane juice distillate producers. But no, I mean, if you look at the European designation for rum agricole, which is kind of a pretty decent standard to follow for the category of rum, it must come from one of those designated French departments. And there's a good reason for that. The AOC, which for those of you that don't know, the Appellation d'origine contrôlée, is like a government, a French governmental group that basically mandates that certain agricultural French products that come from a specific geographical designation taste exactly like they're supposed to, depending on where they're geographically located. So this is why cognac comes from cognac, and champagne can only come from champagne, and camembert cheese can only come from a certain region of France, and even Brest ducks, or I'm sorry, Brest chickens, lavender de Provence, all of these agricultural products of France like have to follow a very strict system of rules in order to get that geographic designation and AOC on their label. So we have the same type of thing with Rhum Agricole in Martinique, and that's something that began to be developed in the 70s, and it wasn't until 1996 that we actually had approved the rules for the Martinique AOC. So it's not like something that's new and that is trendy and we just started deciding this is how we do it. Like it was decades in the making, and yes, the rules they adapt and change as we change and production changes, but they're pretty consistent from what they were in 1996 when they first came out and were approved. So we do know Martinique does know a thing or two about sugarcane juice distillate. So it is a little frustrating when people are just like, this is a rum agricole, and it's like, but no, it's not, because we spent decades developing those rules and then more decades honing them in. So you can't just say it's rum agricole, just like you can't say it's a Calvados if it's an apple brandy.
Yeah, I've definitely seen the uh, sugarcane distillates here in the U.S. that have agricole written on them, and it's kind of like, someone in I don't know, in France being like, here's our Texas barbecue right here. People in Texas would be like, let's fight right now. So
Yeah, or that one American champagne. Just kidding.
yep.
No offense, no names, but we
No,
all know
it's
what it
it,
is.
it's out there. So one thing I was a little unclear about. So I want to talk about beets versus sugarcane. But so if I'm understanding this correctly, so Martinique was producing sugarcane that was being primarily distributed to France. This goes back to the colonial period right here. And at some point, likely out of a matter of economics, uh, the French started using sugar beets instead of sugar cane. And so immediately there's not a demand for Martinique sugar from the sugarcane plant. And so there's not molasses. So they've been making a lot of more traditional rum, which you guys might think of as rum from uh, Mount Gay in Barbados, or so different types of what are called industrial rum. So they're making more industrial rum, but at that point in time, they're like, well, we don't even have the molasses to make rum, so let's just use the sugarcane juice. So is it true that it was primarily an economic driver that led to the sugarcane juice distillate kind of becoming the primary route? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean the terminology Rhum Agricole, kind of, even though now we have, applied it to the AOC, but in the early 1800s, agricole was the agriculture. It was the small farmers' rum. Like they would have portable stills, and they would they didn't have the means to make rum from molasses. They decided to just take the raw product and distill on these portable pot stills. So like it was kind of known around Martinique with the small farmers that the agricultural rum from the farmers was made from sugarcane juice, and then the industrial rum was made from molasses, because as you said, there was a lot of there was a lot of molasses production in Martinique, in the colonial times. So that switchover absolutely had a lot to do with the fact that um, Martinique was an island that the primary crop was sugarcane, and all of a sudden the demand was gone. So what were they going to do with all of this crop? Because the farmers had already, kind of developed and kind of made their own way and with this other type of rum. And that's a little bit where Omer Clement, who founded Rhum Clement, I mean, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's a good story. He kind of became known as the godfather of Rhum Agricole because he saw what the small farmers were doing, and he saw it as an opportunity to continue to help the economy from going into a recession. So he really pushed that agenda to make the switch and still utilize the sugarcane, not make it go to waste. The reason he was able to do that, I mean, aside from the fact that he was, a doctor, he was what what records seem to show is that he was the first Black doctor in Martinique. He went to France, he got his doctorate in medicine, and then he came back to Martinique. So that's what the records seem to point to. He also was a politician. So it wasn't necessarily that he was an agriculturalist or a rum maker, but he saw that as a politician, the opportunity to help his island. That all kind of happened to coincide with the fact that in 1902 there was like the second largest volcanic disaster in recorded history, which the first was Mount Vesuvius, the second was the eruption of Mount Pelee, the famous volcano in Martinique, which killed instantly 30,000 people and completely annihilated the capital of the then capital, St. Pierre. So the story that relates to this is that Omer Clement was the mayor of La Francois, which is on the east coast of Martinique. The capital is on the west coast, the then capital, St. Pierre. And they were holding elections right in May, right when the eruption was about to happen. And he went over to the West Coast to the elections, and he saw the volcano was smoking. And he was like, this thing is going to blow. Like, we need to cancel the elections. And everybody was like, no, no, no. And like, no joke, from what I've read, the local scientist who was a high school student said, no, there's no way this is going to erupt. It might just have local damage, but it's never going to make it to the capital. And additionally, stories say that there were like foot-long centipedes coming out of the volcano and like 4-foot-long snakes killing livestock all around the volcano. And still, all of the government officials were like, we're listening to this scientist. He says nothing's going to happen. We're going to stay. Oh, Mayor, if you don't stay, you can consider yourself like excommunicated as the mayor of La Francois. So he was like, cool, you guys are crazy. I'm going to go back to the West Coast. Like, I would love to be a part of your elections, but see you later. And what happened was the next day, the volcano erupted. It completely annihilated everything in the capital, including every government official. And so he was the only government official left in Martinique. So it's a crazy story, but because of that, he became the deputy mayor of Martinique. And so he had the political power to influence, the changeover of molasses rum to sugarcane rum, because at that time, like, his island was suffering economically, and he saw that as an opportunity to help, build it back up. So crazy story, but true.
You had me at foot-long centipedes.
Yeah,
I
said
just,
no one ever.
God. Yeah, I remember seeing the Pele piece, but thank you for also adding some context there. That is honestly very helpful. So something that, despite obviously being a fairly contained area, it does seem that, I feel like a more popular conversation in spirits right now is the microclimates that seem to really exist in and around Oaxaca quite a bit in terms of that influences mezcal. But it does seem that Martinique, what was it, like take 2 hours or an hour and a half to cross the island, something like that.
Hmm.
But that what you might find on the Atlantic coast versus on the Caribbean side, or however you would get into it, really can influence the climate dramatically. So, obviously, this is a way of diving into it. But when we think about the breadth of flavor that you can experience in agricole, some of that's going to be the sugarcane plant, some of that's going to be the climate. Um, when uh, when people are tasting like a flight of agricole, for example, what are some of the flavors they might encounter that might drive that?
Um, you're absolutely right. Martinique, though it is small, it's only about 420 square miles. So, I mean, it's, the size of Los Angeles, smaller than Los Angeles. Um, it is very different from, the different altitudes to, there's arid sections of it compared to if you drive to Rhum GM, which is in the northmost part of the island. Ironically, we play Jurassic Park when we're driving people over the bend for the first time, because you're literally in a jungle. So it is very vast, the differences, and you can taste. It's very interesting because with all of those laws that we have with the AOC, it makes it easier almost to compare the terroir or the influence of the elements between each distillery, because they're pretty spread out, like all the AOC distilleries, and that they're making the rum essentially the same way because of how strict the laws are. So it's a cool it's a cool base point um to be able to compare them. Initially, like, I would say some of the influence between our brands in the north, Rhum GM in the north, aside from the fact that we use a water source of the natural spring that's within the volcano, so that adds a lot of minerality and almost a little bit of like viscosity to the rum. Um, there's more of a fruity element. Like, all of the rums have a little bit more of a fruity component to them. And then as opposed to, especially when you get into our aged rums, and that's something people often don't talk about. Like they talk about terroir as something that only you can taste in the unaged products, but and here's a new thing for us. We're actually heard here first, as we've increased production in with all of our products. We've started producing a lot of Rhum Clement at GM, because very quick backstory, in 1989 we stopped producing Rhum Clement at the actual visitor center that you can go to. It's now for many years has been a museum, so you can go to the distillery and like look inside the stills and the fermentation tanks and stuff. But at that time we moved distillation down the street to a distillery called Simone, which also makes HSE. The owner of that distillery is in the family of the owner of the Clement of Spiribam, so it just made sense. And then a couple years ago, we started sourcing some of our rum from GM because we own that distillery. We have full control over it, over the hours we make the rum and whatnot. So recently, we've moved more of our production for both rums up to GM, which you would think would make the flavor less different. But it is very interesting with we're still bringing sugarcane for Clement up to the distillery. So it's still sugarcane that's closer to Clement. And likewise, the aging process could not be more different. The flavors of the rum, once it ages, there's so much influence that is way different with Clement than with GM. Like GM overall is still way fruitier across the board, spicier, fruitier, a little bit of like anise, licorice across the board to all of the SKUs, whereas Clement is much more savory, black pepper, like saline, like a ocean sea influence with all of their rum. So even though the rum is being made at the same place, which it's very much like cognac, you're kind of given a recipe to adhere to and like specific guidelines to adhere to. So like our two quality control teams are always at GM, like tasting the rum that comes off and making sure it adheres to the specific specifications for Clement if they're going to bring it to Clement. Even still, like producing it at the same place, it is completely different. The white rums are completely different and they still keep those characteristics, which is something pretty normal in Martinique. I mean, La Monie produces La Monie and Trois-Rivières, De Paz produces Bailly, and others that are escaping me at this moment. But yeah, it's pretty, and obviously like Simone produces HSE. They did produce Clement. They produce a bunch of rum for bulk. So anyway, yeah, I feel like I went off a little bit on a tangent, but yes, absolutely. All of these factors contribute. The water source, the soil, which the soil near a volcano is obviously quite different in composition than the soil at the south side of the island that, didn't have a volcanic eruption in recent years. And then the fact that Martinique is the East Coast is the Atlantic Ocean and the West Coast is the Caribbean. So any distillery on the East Coast gets a lot more ocean influence than the distilleries on the West Coast because it's like very calm and there's not as much aggressive wind and weather. So, and then the sugarcane varietals also, come into play. Not as much as everybody likes to romanticize about, but they do contribute different flavors.
Got it. So to kind of rank order things, the climate and soil are likely going to play a bigger input than necessarily the sugarcane varietal. Not that that won't contribute, but elevation, terroir, etc., are going to really be the primary drivers.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it doesn't contribute. It definitely does, the varietal, but I would say that more so people are not necessarily in Martinique choosing to grow a sugarcane varietal because of its flavor all the time. I mean, I will say definitely like Con Bleu is something that is unique. It has a very sweet, concentrated sugarcane flavor profile, but it also produces very low yield. It's tough to grow. So it's more of like something that a lot of distilleries are using as like a seasoning to their more, bulky, higher producing rums, because at the end of the day, like, Rhum Agricole is the biggest moneymaker, economy driver on the island. So they have to make rum as much as possible, and it be as effective as possible with their crops, because there's only one crop of sugarcane a year. You grow one crop, that's it for the year, and you have to produce as much rum as possible. So um, the varietals, though, to make sure that they are all varietals that are approved and are flavorful and are of good quality, they do need to be approved by the AOC as well. So in '96, when that document came out, there were only 12 varieties that were approved. Now we're at 25 varieties, although the document doesn't actually state that anymore. It just states that there's a 4-year probational period, where in Martinique we have a sugarcane institute that basically monitors all the different varieties of sugarcane and tries different varieties. And after a 4-year probation period of them trying and seeing what varieties are going to work, they'll decide which ones to add. So at this point we have 25 varieties, but most producers are growing the type of sugarcane that grows best in their soil. So the soil definitely contributes, but certain varieties are going to grow better in the north than in the south. So that more so dictates the variety of sugarcane that you're using, less than the individual flavor, which, is not the most romantic thing, but it's a business, and, it's the economy. So I've been to Kohana in Hawaii, which is a really cool sugarcane juice distillate or distillery. And it's amazing to see. I feel like they have 35 varieties of sugarcane, and they're all so different, and with a naked eye you can just see, some are candy stripes, some are black, some are, I mean, that is just the most beautiful story, and it's so cool to see. But in Martinique we're talking about millions of millions and millions of gallons a year. I think at this point, we're producing at GM 2 million liters of 110 proof rum a year. So, we gotta balance the romanticism with the efficiency in some way.
Gotta feed the economy for sure.
100%.
So to all the non-French speaking Americans out there listening, when Kiowa is saying if you're like, what the heck is GM? That is, you might know it as Rhum JM, just like it's not Rhum Clement, it's Rhum Clement. I've got a French last name, but that's about it. But so anyway, when the first time I ever heard you say GM, I was like, what's that? And then I was like, okay, it's JM. So all that to say, we're throwing a lot of terms at you guys. Those will all be in the show notes for anything you want to know about any brands or anything like that. So just a little French primer there for you guys.
When I order rum Clement at a restaurant, often I do start out by saying, I'll take the Clement, and then we see how it goes from there, just to make things baseline. So yeah, I apologize. I sometimes forget. I don't speak French fluently, but the last 2 years I've tried. So sometimes I forget.
Yeah, if you get the side eye from the bartender, you're like, oh, okay, we're on the same page. Got it. All right, great.
Right. Thai punch, tea punch,
So I read, and I don't know how much it comes down to. We talked about that the AOC is very highly regulated and keeps quality of a great standard there. But I did read, I think it was actually in Jim Meehan's book, and he interviews Ben Jones in that book, Bartender's Manual. But I think it was there that they talked about that there could have been some French techniques picked up from Calvados and cognac production. I didn't know how much of that Kiowa might have just been a rigor versus actual processes imported from France. Do you know anything about that?
It's funny that you say that, because I talked to Ben before this, and I was like, where is there this article that says this? And he was like, I don't know. I feel like I said it somewhere, and he couldn't remember where he said it. Anyway, um, not so much Calvados, I would say. But yeah, I the first kind of whatever, everything hundreds and hundreds of years ago is kind of up to speculation. And, if there was whatever bits and pieces are recorded, so it's kind of hard to say. But the only thing that I've really come across is in research is that it's thought that in 1650, so um, Martinique was colonized in 1635, so this makes sense a bit, and start bringing over different French things and apparatuses and comforts of life. So in 1650, there is a French cleric named Jean-Baptiste du Tertre, who is thought to have brought over a pot still, probably a cognac still, in order to, start distilling sugarcane juice. And but that and I pot still was kind of the way, as far as I know, until like the mid 19th century. And then of course people wanted to adapt to be more efficient and create more product. And then that's when the column still got brought over, but it wasn't the, two column coffee still. It was a single column still, kind of like the one we use today, but it was specifically for sugar beets, because sugar beets were so big at the time. As you were saying, there's a lot of his French history tied to sugar beets as well. Napoleon, essentially okayed the production of sugar beets and funded sugar beet farms in France, which compiled with slavery being garbage and taxes that Napoleon also screwed over some of the French Caribbean with, compiled kind of was the reason for the sugar crisis. So yeah, sugar beets were already such a big thing, and they were just making sugar beet distillate in a single column still, that then was brought over to Martinique, and those habits were kind of adapted. I was talking to Ben about this too before. I mean, I don't really know why they decided to go exactly with this single column still with Rhum Agricole with the AOC, but I would suspect it's because sugarcane juice is so volatile, and so it's very necessary to distill it as soon as possible. So if you're trying to if we can only harvest once a year, we can only harvest in the dry season, which is from January to September, to the beginning of September, so the end of August. So if you need to harvest all of that sugar cane in the dry season over the entire island, you really need something that's going to quickly distill. So that is, higher yield, more efficient way to, distill more product faster in that short window that we have. So that's why I think we ended up adopting the column still as the AOC way to go. By adapting the plate, so there's, it's a smaller still. It's basically like a very tiny two column still, with one column stacked on top of the other. So you have like the analyzer and the rectifier column in one. But yeah, I mean, that way you're really able to quickly distill all of that sugarcane juice before it spoils, because otherwise it will spoil. I mean, in like Haiti, oftentimes they're distilling sugarcane juice when they have it, but then they're boiling it into a sugarcane honey so they can distill that later so it won't spoil. But that's not an option for us in Martinique. So column still it is.
Yeah, the often shortage on trying cane juice in the States is possible, but it's not readily available. Kind of like trying to get your hands on pulque, although it's probably even harder. But yeah, got it. That's helpful, and I appreciate that. There's probably just some nuance in terms of what that is. Now I'll have to figure out what source I saw. I promise I didn't make it up, but someone was referencing that, so I'll have to look that up and see where I found that from. So.
No, I think you're right. I think Ben just doesn't remember.
After a while, you've forgotten more than you remember, right? So
100%.
So I've also heard you before talk about getting stuff into more tactical things for people out there that are like, okay, I've tried this before, or you've got me, I'm curious. So I feel like I've heard you before say, "Oh, if you are more of a person who drinks these types of spirits, I would recommend these types of agricoles versus, if you're more over here." Do you mind kind of giving people a basic primer on where they should start if they're intrigued today? And then perhaps we can talk a little cocktail stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest form, you know, people identify visually with spirit. So, not, but then, that evolves into something else in that, like, if you're somebody that usually I do ask that question, what do you typically drink? If you drink gin or tequila, I have you try a unaged rum agricole. And that, yes, you visually see it and you're like, oh, it does look like gin. Oh, it does look like a blanc tequila. Um, but additionally, there are a lot of components and a lot of esters that are, congeners, flavor components that are developed in a blanc rum agricole that are parallel to especially agave spirits. There's a lot of like fruity components and esters, flavor compounds that are developed in fermentation that I personally identify with in agave spirits. Um, I live in Southern California and agave is huge here. And the first distillery I ever went to was Fortaleza. And then I went there 5 more times. And, not just because of the proximity, but because, before I fell in love with rum and rum agricole specifically, I was really into agave. And I think that might be one of the reasons I fell so in love with rum agricole is because it reminded me of the things I loved most about agave. It was just fresh and fruity and mineral driven, and it really just like captured the essence of the true, whatever raw material. So I often ask that in that same, and we'll talk a little bit more about this with cocktails, but if you're a rum agricole blanc or tequila drinker, I often pair and by the way, those two things mix really well together in a split base cocktail. um Biological sherry, so like a Fino or Amontillado, and this is for the real nerds. All three of those things fit really well together, and I feel like if you like one, you'll like all. And on the other side of the spectrum, for our whiskey drinkers out there, whiskey, cognac, and even there's kind of like subgenres in there. When people tell me they like, well, first of all, an aged spirit has a completely different flavor profile than an unaged spirit. There's certain chemical compounds and like chemical reactions that happen in the barrel with the alcohol that create new flavor profiles that were not possible to create in the unaged spirit. Aside from the fact that like the spirit's extracting the flavor of the wood and the tannins and different woody vanilla chemical compounds, there's additional like flavors that can develop just from the alcohol reacting with the wood. So that happens with all spirits. So there's definitely some parallels, whether you're drinking any aged spirit you're drinking, there's definitely some of those parallel flavor profiles. But within that segment, if somebody tells me they like scotch, I usually give them a rum that is aged you know 10 years or old, that is much older, because especially in Martinique, it's not necessarily accelerated aging, but it has that perception because of the high humidity and the temperature. The extraction rate is much quicker. So, and especially with Clement, that ocean influence adds almost like a peatiness. So those combinations of things, like an aged Clement over 10 years, 10 or 15-year aged Clement, I always push toward a Scotch drinker and they're like very surprised. And then for like a bourbon, I usually actually push somebody toward either, one of our, usually actually, and this is a totally different topic, this would be like some of our St. Lucian rums that are actually made from molasses. So not really what we're talking about today, but bourbon drinkers, I feel like that round caramel vanilla flavor profile. So I usually push them toward one of our St. Lucian products. And then like cognac drinkers, across the board. There's a lot of similarities just in the background of, I mean, our age statements, our cognac age statements. So that's pretty much an easy sell with like the VSOP has a lot of the same flavor characteristics as well that you might recognize from a cognac. And then my other thing is like if somebody specifically says they like rye, all the JM aged products have a spice to them that really is reminiscent of a rye product. So, and then to piggyback on the sherry thing, any oxidized sherry, so any brown sherry that doesn't have sugar in it. So this would be like an Amontillado or an Oloroso or a Palo Cortado. Those are great within that family of aged products. So that was a mouthful. Sorry.
No, that was I was soaking that up. Yeah, for the real nerds, when the sherry conversation comes out, that's when you know you've really hit it right there. But no, that's helpful. When I before married like a Fino or Manzanilla in like a margarita, it always like intuitively begins to make sense to me. Okay, yeah, like uh aged versus unaged, while the flavor profiles can vary, the characteristics become more similar. So that's useful to kind of for you to place with me. Yeah, to think
But
about.
it's also visual, like the
Mhm.
dark spirits with the dark sherry and the dark rum, and then the light spirits, the clear spirits like gin and tequila with the biological sherry with the rum blanc. Like visually, it makes sense, but so that's a good way to remember it. But flavor wise, it also makes sense. If you were to do it blind, it would make sense too. So
Got it. No, that's helpful. Yeah, that was okay. So where am I? What am I thinking now? That was good. So I heard this really got me intrigued, and I don't have it on hand, so it's probably going to be something I'm going to do the next couple of days. But I heard you talk about, I think it was a 50-50 martini at one point in time. I'd love to hear about that. And then also, maybe we should talk about tea punch for a minute too, because obviously we haven't touched on this touchstone drink that many people have or haven't had. So, talk to us about. I think it was during COVID you were interviewed and were talking about 50-50 martinis.
yeah, I mean, a little bit of this is stemmed by getting older and traveling around and drinking there's only so many daiquiris that my acid reflux can handle. Also, I love a martini. I've always loved a classic martini. And but drinking a full martini, like not 50-50 full strength is a little bit too much. Also I love vermouth, so it all works out. I like to call it a Martinique. Just play on words. Always love a good play on words and pun. I'm never too good for a pun. Um, yeah, no, I really it's kind of my drink of choice. If I'm not drinking a tea punch, I'm drinking a Martinique, and it's usually 100 proof Blanc Agricole. So I'm usually using JM 100 proof Blanc or Clement Con Bleu. And then so 50 that 50%, so like an ounce and a half. And then what I do like if I'm being super picky and the bartender's not slammed and or I know the bartender and I don't feel bad annoying them, I'll ask for a split of dry vermouth, uh Manzanilla or Fino sherry, biological sherry, and Blanc vermouth. So it's like a half ounce of each, half ounce of dry sherry, half ounce of Blanc vermouth, half ounce of dry vermouth. And then the secret ingredient is a bar spoon of Suze, if you can get your hands on it, and a lemon twist, and an olive if you want. Why not do both? Everybody likes a snack. But yeah, it's delicious, and I think that's the thing that people need to kind of get out of their minds about cocktails, is that there's not a box that every cocktail needs to go in. Like a martini doesn't need to go in the gin box. Like a martini is also delicious with tequila, a Blanc tequila. Like going back to that, you could absolutely swap out what I just said with the same specs with a Blanco tequila. So, it's same thing with an old fashioned. Like or you're gonna laugh at this as well. An agricole fashioned, a an aged rum, old fashioned. And here's the advice you didn't ask for. Something that I, learned in my days bartending, but is also like a life hack if you're making cocktails at home, is that the recipe for an old fashioned is traditionally a teaspoon of sugar or one of those little, perfect English looking tea white sugar cubes, and 3 to 4 dashes of bitter. But if you want to like think outside the box and try something different, you can use, instead of that teaspoon of sugar, you can also use a 1/4 ounce of any syrup, any homemade syrup that you want to make. Just if you're making a simple syrup, simmer it with whatever herbs or fruits or whatever. Or you can use a 1/2 ounce of any liqueur. So that's like kind of the spec for making your at-home old fashioned. So go crazy. Take a 1/2 ounce of banana liqueur, put 2 ounces of, it's always 2 ounces with this template of aged rum, and then find some chocolate chili bitters or something weird at your local cocktail store, and whatever, go crazy. Like the possibilities are endless. Everybody's got some weird old liqueur probably sitting in the back of their cabinet. Like you can make an old fashioned with that, and like whatever, choose your adventure. So
A friend of mine in Manhattan said that banana liqueur was what got him through the early part of the of lockdown, with his old fashions at home right there. So there you go.
it's very hot right now, the banana liqueur.
So so I'm thinking about the wait, no, what was the martini term? What was it the did you call it the Martinique? Is that what you called it?
The Martinique.
Martinique. Okay, got it. I got it now. So if somebody wanted to take a run at this on their own, and weren't feeling like flexing fully at the store, would you recommend starting with a blanc vermouth, a dry, whatever they can get their hands on? Or if you're ordering and the bartender's busier, what would be your simpler order on your martini there?
It would be dry vermouth.
Dry.
I mean, it depends if you like a little bit of a sweeter martini, then you could go with blanc. But yeah, I mean, and that's easy because usually the bartender will know what a 50-50 martini is. So you can just say, but I do like watching their eyes light up when I say, can I get a 50-50 martini with that Rhum Agricole? And they're like, what? Okay. Like, are you crazy? And then it's like, oh no, maybe that might be good. So it's always a fun moment for me.
I bet that's and that's helpful. And the touch of Sue's I've definitely got written down as well right there. Um, Man, okay. I feel like we've covered a pretty good amount of ground. And yes, I should say at Tales of the Cocktail this year, because we just got it here in St. Louis where I am, but I did get to taste Chairman's Reserve and it's solid. So yeah, it's if you guys are looking to for your more if I may, like your more industrial, your rum industrial, your molasses based rum, Chairman's Reserve was very, very delicious.
It is. It is a lot of flavor in its own little category by itself, the St. Lucian rum category, because there's only the one distillery and it doesn't really fit in into any of the boxes. I would say it's like somewhere between Barbados and Jamaican rum.
Got it. That's helpful. Okay. Um, Maybe we'll see if we have a minute for that. But I did want to talk about, kind of, I mean, wherever we are in this pandemic, it's over. It's still going. You just, recovered. So I'm glad. But, uh, obviously COVID, and it was interesting being at Tales this year where I heard a number of people say that you feel like, the amount of spirit free presence was really exploding. There's lots of conversations about wellness, work life balance, etc. So, away from the sugarcane stuff, you're also involved at another round, another rally. And so, a lot of times, I know that in particular, this was very big when bars and restaurants were closed early on in the pandemic. But tell us a little bit about that organization because I'd really like to get into how do you what changes? How are you thinking about how the industry needs to evolve long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely, I mean, everybody, I have a friend who actually put this in the most simple form, though a little bit harsh. He said that the pandemic caused us to step away from, in the hospitality industry, it's caused us to step away from an abusive relationship and really reflect on it from an unbiased way. Whereas when you're in the relationship, it's kind of hard to see what's in front of you. So there are definitely some things, some systemic problems within the hospitality industry that need to change. And it's the only industry where a lot of owners of restaurants and whatnot, and not at their fault, this is just how it's always been. They don't really factor labor into their business plan. Like they just assume that everything is going to work off of a tip system. But when this is not the way in other countries. And when you base everything on a tipped system, um, you're really opening up people's. I mean, you're not creating a solid foundation for anybody to build a life on because they can't depend on a constant salary. I mean, look what happened during the pandemic. An entire industry lost their salary overnight and did not know what the next day was going to bring. And most of these people are already living paycheck to paycheck. So it just made an unstable industry more unstable. So it really brought some foundational changes to the forefront that need to happen. And the tip system is really whack, and it's something that's based on historical um, racism, and it's something that definitely needs to be changed. And another rally, they're really, first of all, first and foremost, the reason I got involved with them, one of my best friends, she had started this nonprofit a couple of years before the pandemic, but they were supposed to have their big launch party during Bartenders Weekend in March of 2020. So that obviously didn't happen. But they were set up as a educational resource to try and before the pandemic even, they were set up as an educational resource that was trying to break some of these systemic practices and get rid of the tip system. And additionally, it was set up as an emergency system for bartenders and for the entire hospitality industry, because most people in the hospitality industry don't have insurance. So obviously the one side really took hold when the pandemic started, and it immediately became an emergency resource, nonprofit, in order to help everybody, and in order to cope with the difficulty of seeing all of my friends, because I come from a bartending background. I saw overnight, like, all of my friends lose their job and like live in this dark, uncertain time where they didn't know if they were ever going to step behind the bar again, or like go into a restaurant again, or if they were going to lose their restaurant. So I decided in order, as a coping mechanism, and I would spend every hour I could when I wasn't working to save our company, Spiribam, which also had to figure out how to go all online and set up e-commerce and all this good stuff, which was new to me, and figured it out as I went. But um yeah, I spent all my time just like trying to help them get online with their systems. And luckily, they got a couple huge donations and were able to distribute $500 grants. But in the first week, there were 70,000 job applicants. Like, I mean, and that was just, uh, it was heartbreaking to go through those. And that was the first week. Like, the first week having that many applications of people already um, so worried, and so like, the anxiety level in the first week was just like insane. So just think, like, after this kept going on for months and months and months, how terrible it was for our industry. And no amount of PPP loans, or measures passed really was solidifying it. Though they did help, it really just like put a spotlight on some of the changes that need to be made within the industry. And I'm happy, I still serve on the board, and I have a check-in with them once a week, just to talk about what's going on, and offer my input for upcoming projects and whatnot. But I'm really happy to see that they were able to help so many people. I think they gave away over $3 million in grants so far, so most of those COVID related grants. So yeah, they're Amanda did a really good seminar at Tales last year, which is still online, that goes really into detail about the tips system, and how detrimental it is to the industry, and yet it's ingrained in the industry. So it's going to take a lot to change it. But some of the biggest corporations, like the National Restaurant Association, run propaganda campaigns for it. So there's a lot of barriers to get rid of it, but in the process of eliminating it. But it's definitely gave everybody a lot of time to think about everything in the industry and like what we can do to make it better. So at the end of the day, it's not all dark. It's there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's people, out there fighting to make changes and make it better. So I think we're in a good place, and a better place than we were before.
That, yeah, I mean, still mostly being someone from the outside looking in. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That seemed to kind of be some of the sentiment I picked up at Tales this year, is that, yeah, we did step away from that relationship, and hopefully we're not falling back into all those old habits. Other than, and people should, but other than going to another round, another rally, and learning more, making a donation, are there things people should out there listening be thinking about, that ways that legislation, other things they should pay attention to? And that might be on the site, but anything you'd recommend for people that are like, yeah, I've heard about this, tips not being good thing, but what should I do now? Any suggestions on that?
I will send you a couple links, I think, for you to post in this, that I know I have bookmarked, and videos that I can't explain it. Well, it's better if you just watch the video or read the article. But I mean, you can support restaurants that have eliminated tipping, and they work it into their there are a lot of restaurants now that have eliminated tipping altogether. I mean, in Los Angeles, all of the Sugarfish restaurants have done that. I want to say Danny Meyer as well, and support some of those restaurants, and don't support the ones that are. I don't know. I don't want to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So,
Sure.
just do your research before you give somebody your money. I guess with everything, and that's all you can do, is like do your research before you decide where to spend your money. But it's heartbreaking too, though, because it's not been in our business plan as like individual entrepreneurs to factor some of these things in, because this is just the way that it's been. So it's like, it's a heartbreaking process. It's like, how do independent people that want to start a bar or a restaurant, that this was a dream that they've always had, and they put together this plan because that was the norm, and now the norm is kind of being changed. So you have to factor in like insurance and labor and all of these different things that didn't used to be something you had to factor into that business plan. So I don't know that I have the answers, but to just be as informed as possible, and also try and get involved in your local politics a little bit, if there's any sort of measures that are going to benefit your local hospitality industry, then that you can help push by talking to your representatives, or going to your town hall, and just getting more involved locally in your community. I don't know. I know there's some people in Los Angeles in the community that are involved in local politics, that, on their social media, if there's something that's going to benefit them, they'll post it online and say, write a letter to this representative, or like, make sure you vote on this measure. I think, especially with me, I wasn't interested in politics in any capacity before the pandemic. And now most of my friends will tell me that I'm a little bit crazy about being too involved in politics. But I think that the beauty of politics is that it's supposed to be, the ideal is a democracy. And the more that we're all educated about what's going on in our own community, like, we can affect our community in such a huge way just by not necessarily being involved in the national everything, like, but knowing what's going on in your own neighborhood. You can have such an impact just by listening to your local town hall. And there's always something that's going to affect, because the restaurant business, the hospitality community, is such a huge piece of your local economy, right? So so much that has to do at your local town hall is either going to benefit or not that segment of the industry. So just know what's going on in your neighborhood and make informed decisions. And it starts from, the bottom and works its way up. So that would be my best advice, but I'll also send you some links.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to include those. But yeah, I mean, overall, national politics or whatever, quote unquote, sexier, but the local stuff is what really impacts you for the most part. So yeah. Kiowa, this has been great. So regarding Spiribam, so that's Spiribam, so people can see your guys' lovely portfolio stuff. But if people want to keep up with you or see your beautiful Instagram, where should they be looking for that?
You can find me on Instagram at Rhum Muffin, RHUMMUFFIN. Long story. But you can find me on Instagram. Yeah, I slide into my DMs.
Okay, there you go. You've gotten the invitation right there, guys.
Don't find me on Facebook. I stopped doing the Facebook during the pandemic. If you find me on there, I'll never answer.
Terrific. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. The show notes for today's episode are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. If you'd like to keep up with what we're working on, there are two great ways to do so. One, our short weekly newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, which you can sign up for at decodingcocktails.com/newsletter, or give us a follow on Instagram at Decoding Cocktails. If you think this podcast is great stuff, we'd love it if you'd subscribe or, of course, share an episode with a friend. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon, and happy cocktailing.